This is Jimmy from High Fly Fitness. This is part two of the interview series with Greg Nuckols, and today we're going to be talking about programming. And one of the most viewed articles on Greg's site is called "More is More," and essentially it discusses why doing more volume, more frequency, more of anything might be the answer to solve your stalls in your programming. So one of the basics of programming is what we're going to establish some fundamental keys to starting your programming off right. So, Greg, for the novice athlete, or let's say the intermediate athlete who has been following general templates for a while and they don't necessarily know where to start off, what would you recommend if let's say they're stalling, but they've been trying everything. The novice has tried fat and every program they can find, but they still are not able to progress, but they're still generally new to lifting. What would you recommend them to do for their general programming template?
Now, how new are we talking about?
Let's say 6 months. They've been program hopping for 6 months. Every other month they want to try a different program, 5-3-1. Let's say they've done starting strength, but they didn't like it. They did upper lower, legs push pull, everything you can think of for a general template online. They've tried, but they're not progressing. What would you say the reason is for that, and how would you fix that?
Well, I would say first things first, they need to find something that they like and they enjoy doing and that they can stick with and give it a nice shot.
Okay, so let's say they got something they can stick with now, but they've done this for 3 months and now they're stalling. So what do you think they should do if they're stalling to progress? Let's say they're doing a starting strength program. Like, what basic programming changes can they do to help them continue to progress?
Okay, so there are two major factors that determine how much weight you can lift. One, I'll just put under the overarching term of like neurological efficiency. That has to do with like both technique, like assuming they have pretty good technique, and that they've maybe not necessarily mastered it, but that they've become rather proficient at it, to the point where strength-wise, there's not really any low-hanging fruit that where they can easily get stronger just by practicing the movement more. So that's one factor, and the other factor is just purely how large their muscles are. I mean, you can be as neurologically efficient. You could be the most neurologically efficient person in the world, and if you have tiny muscles, like your nervous system is acting on your muscles. They're not large enough to produce sufficient force to lift a lot of weight. You're not going to lift a lot of weight. So if they've been following pretty solid programming, their technique is good, and they're still not getting any stronger, the most obvious factor is probably just that they're too small. So they need to put on some mass, and the most straightforward way to do that is increase training volume and eat more. So in terms of just general recommendations, increase training volume by like 20-30%. Like, let's say they're doing a program that has like 3 main work sets or something. Maybe up that to like 4, maybe 5 work sets, or add like higher rep, lower weight, back off set, increase accessory work, something like that. Find a way that to lift their legs to get more volume and to increase muscle size, and that's the most straightforward way to continue making gains.
So muscle size, let's say they're small, and the muscle size is one of the key factors to getting them stronger. So increasing the volume would increase the total tonnage over the course of the week. Why would you recommend that over, let's say, increasing weight over time? Would that not do a similar thing to simply increasing their working sets, or maybe that's too difficult for them to do?
Well, okay, so just zooming out and taking kind of like a meta view of the hypertrophy literature, the thing that is most strongly associated with gains in muscle mass is simply training volume. Like if there have been a couple studies comparing equivalent training volumes with different average intensities, and in those studies, the people who train heavier tend to gain a little bit more strength, simply because they were practicing closer to how they were playing. But in terms of overall muscle gains, very, very similar. And so, if the you're training for is to add more mass, the most reliable thing you can do is, like I said, to increase training volume. So then the question becomes kind of what intensity range do you do it in? And so, like I said, in those studies with equivalent training volume, the people who increased volume at a higher intensity tended to get more strength gains. But you kind of run into a point of diminishing returns there eventually, simply because, let's say you're training at 70% versus like 85 or 90% of your one rep max. It's much easier to add in two sets of 10 at 7% instead of 4 or 5 sets of 5 at 85% or something. You would get pretty similar increases in training volume, but you're simply not going to be nearly as needed from 65, 70, 75% as you would from increasing training volume to the same extent at a higher intensity. And also, that somewhat touches on organizing training across the training week, because obviously if you're trying to add volume, in a lot of those studies, it was exclusively training at lower intensities or higher intensities. But obviously that's not how most people train in the real world.
Right.
So you can still get higher intensity stimuli at some point in the week, adding some sort of modulation on a weekly scale, while still training at a lower intensity where you can increase your volume with less fatigue accumulation at some other point during the week.
So would you say that kind of a daily undulated periodization would be maybe preferable once that person has stalled on their linear progression, if they want to increase total weekly volume? Because would it be difficult for them to do 5x5 every single day if they've been doing 3x5 every single day? Because at a certain point would they stop at 5x5? Because would they still be able to increase weight at that point, or would they need to do something different with their intensities as a result of the accumulating fatigue, I assume, that would occur after increasing the working sets by, let's say, 2 every single day?
Yeah, I think the first way to go about it is to add in some daily undulation, and that's a term that's kind of become trendy lately, but it's really nothing super new and cutting edge. You go back 10 years, and what we call daily undulating now, they called heavy day, light day. So, that's the tried and true method that people have been using, pretty much since the dawn of time. If you're trying to lift, say, twice in a week, one day you in your heavy stuff at 80, 85, 90%, and the other day you do more hypertrophy-based work at a lighter intensity.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So in the study that you wrote about, these guys were squatting 8 sets to failure with 80% of their max. Would you recommend a similar type of method to train to failure, or would that just be risking injury?
No, I personally wouldn't recommend it. If you look at the results of the study, clearly it worked very, very well. But no, I definitely think that looking at risk to reward is something that you should take into account there. And I think you can get very similar gains without the risk of training failure. But I will say in that study, it wasn't true failure like way most strength athletes think of it. How they defined failure was either like volitional failure, like when they said, "I don't think I have another rep left in me," or, and this is the more important point, when it took them more than, I think it was 3 seconds between reps to be able to do the next one. Usually when you see people go to like true failure and miss a rep, like let's say they're squatting, they'll stand at the top of a rep and take like 3 or 4 reps before they try the next one. The way they defined failure in that study, their set probably would have been done like 2 reps ago.
Okay. So they're not necessarily.
So how most people define it, it wouldn't be like a 10 RPE. It would be 8 sets to, depending on the person, like an 8 or a 9 RPE.
Okay. So, can this kind of methodology be just, okay, keep doing more, keep doing more, keep doing more? I mean, it's obviously a very general recommendation, but a lot of people can probably benefit from it. And I think one of the greatest parts about this is it doesn't necessarily mean more volume within one day. A lot of bodybuilders will want to maximize their volume within the day, but then the weekly volume, like you mentioned before, isn't very high. So does this also assume increasing frequency, not simply daily volume?
Yeah. Well, okay. So another thing I'd like to touch on here as well is not just the stimulus itself, but also like responsiveness to stimuli, because like you were saying, eventually you're just going to hit a point where it's not tenable anymore. Let's say you're doing like 3 sets now, and then you stall and you do 4 sets, and then you stall and you do 5 sets. Like 3 years from now, are you supposed to be doing like 30 sets? Like, hopefully not, unless you're James Lewis. So you have to look at the magnitude of the stimulus applied, but you also have to look at responsiveness to that stimulus. And so I think that something that's very underutilized by a lot of people is simply recognizing the value of regular deloads or planned reduction volume. Because what you're looking at there, when most people think deloads, they just think take a break from the gym, maybe like reduce injury risk, something like that. But in terms of long-term progress, an important thing that deloads do is, it's removing a large amount of the stimulus that you're placing on your body. And so then when you're exposed again to a stimulus of similar magnitude, your body's more responsive to it. So just the basis of the repeated pulse effect, like the more times in sequence you're exposed to the same or very similar stimulus, the less robustly you respond to it. And so deloads and planned reductions in volume help kind of mitigate that. And that's something that I use quite a bit in my training, especially I'm about 19 months in between meets right now. And the biggest reason for that is just, I'm busier than I would like to be, like in trying to prep for a meet. And when I'm training for a meet, it's usually 5 or 6 days a week, a couple hours a day, like really doing everything I can to maximize my performance on meet day. But I just simply don't have the time to train like that year round for years and years on end. And also my body just gets beat down from doing that. So something that I use quite a bit in my own training is when I hit a peak, what I'll do is take like a month or 2 or even 3 and kind of taper down my volume progressively.
Okay.
and try to maintain strength as best I can with the lowest training volume possible. And
Okay.
then that kind of reestablishes that baseline. And so then when I start ramping up volume again, I'm much more sensitive to it than I would have if I would have kept training at a high volume. So, my training volume has increased, from the time that I started training, but it's not just increasing week to week, month to month indefinitely. Using that strategy of strategically reducing volume for a month or two at a time, and then increasing your responsiveness to a given magnitude of stimulus allows you to then start ramping back up volume again, and you can keep progressing with much more modest volume than you would need to otherwise without using that.
Right. So, I mean, overall, the understanding is that more is more most of the time, as long as you're responding well to it, and then adjustments need to be made whether or not to continue increasing, or maybe you're doing too much, you need to bring it back down a notch, bring the volume down. Let's say you peak for a meet, that requires a pretty significant decrease in volume after that meet, and then work your base building up again. Build the bases, get the volume, work capacity overall much stronger, and allow you to tolerate a lot more to then continue to progress. And that essentially, right, is a overarching understanding of the article.
Right. Yeah. And something else to keep in mind with the study is it was like the intervention itself was it was like, I believe it was 6 weeks of different volume. I think it was standardized lead in, and then 6 weeks of different volume, and then like a 2 week standardized kind of watch out before they maxed. And so you kind of get from that study a snapshot that, over those 6 weeks, squatting with 8 sets instead of 4 sets or 1 set tended to produce, better results over the time frame of that study. But, there's no way of saying, like, let's say they did that over a year, and the group that started at 1 set did 1 set until they plateaued, which they had at the end of 6 weeks, and then increase their volume from there. Whereas, like, 8 set group, maybe run 8 sets until they stall, and then maybe they increase it further from there. Let's say they bump it up to 10 sets or 12 sets. Like, how many people keep benefiting from that, and how many people start overreaching or overtraining with that level of volume? So, it's whenever you're interpreting any type of research, you have to interpret it kind of by its own rules. You can't take like a 1-day study looking at like acute changes in hormones and proteins or something and then extrapolate that to 16 weeks. And you can't take a 6 or 10 week study and then extrapolate that to years and years. I mean, the study is what it is. It showed, I feel like, pretty convincingly, that over a relatively short amount of time, doing quite a bit more tends to be better than doing less than that. But when you're training not on the time scale of 6 weeks, but, where do I want to be a decade from now? You can't just take a 6 week study and extrapolate it out to that type of time scale.
Right. And you can expect long-term progress to maintain itself. We've talked about this many times. Individual differences plays a large role, and then individual recovery ability plays a large role, and everything matters essentially for the progression for each individual to continue. So different things may need to be done to ensure long-term progress, as we mentioned throughout this interview. So that kind of sums up interview number 2. I hope we have more to come. These were very awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Please rate, comment, subscribe. Check out Greg's site. It's gregnuckols.com. I'll give another link in the description box below. I hope you guys learned a lot from these, as I did. And that's awesome. So see you guys later.